Hello. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Great. I haven't been very organised and printed out my speech, so it's on a very small phone. So excuse me as I scroll rather antisocially. So yes, Bubble Bros. Hope everyone, a few of you have been enjoying a glass of bubbles. Good to see a few flutes out and about, and that's always encouraging. So Bubble Bros, I don't know how much people know, but I'll just sort of give you a brief overview, a little bit about the business, kind of where we started, how we got set up, what we're doing next. And then please feel to ask me any questions. I think I've got about 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and ram it all into that. Tell me to shut up if I start prattling on over that. I'm going to put my leg up here as well. Just feels about right. Hope that's okay. So Bubble Bros was founded by myself and my business partner Joe in 2015. The seed of the business was actually sown by Joe's wife earlier in the summer of that year, whilst we were all at Wilderness Festival, which is a sort of middle-class mecca on the festival circuit. Very lovely. Joe's wife overheard one of the revellers there exclaiming in desperation, "I would literally cut off my own hand for a cold glass of Prosecco right now." A bit extreme, but you know, people get to that stage. And it was in that moment that we realised that amongst all of the artisanal foodie festival offerings, the dim sum and the cheese heritage toasties and the wood-fired pizzas and the made fresh in front of your eyes ramen, that the bar offering was really quite standard. And that specifically no one was doing anything very interesting or notable with Prosecco specifically, despite its meteoric rise in popularity. You know, as Brits, we drink an enormous amount. And the event space needed a decent quality, interesting and engaging sparkling wine offering. And so Bubble Bros was born out of that moment. And our first offering was the world's first Prosecco van, which entered the scene when a friend of Joe's came across a Piaggio Ape, which is one of the little three-wheelers, for his coffee business. It actually turned out to be surplus to his requirements. So he pointed it in our direction, and we began from there, converting this little van and giving birth to the Prosecco van. So yes, we cobbled together a few £1,000s, and we took the plunge and bought, converted, stickered up our first vehicle, and then thought, what are we going to do with this thing? So in the late autumn of 2015, we publicised our new toy on a handful of wedding blogs, Rock My Wedding being one of the sort of more notable of them. Anyone who's worked within the wedding industry is probably familiar, or anyone who's got married or is very familiar with that because it's full of inspiration. We did a little bit of a promotion with them, and we naively awaited the world's response. And I remember the day very clearly because both Joe and I were still working our day jobs in advertising agencies up in London. And I was also working with my sister Rosie here, running a leather goods brand. And I had a day of meetings lined up, and Joe was actually on a shoot that day. We'd included our mobile numbers on our listing on Rock My Wedding. And I just remember my phone vibrating constantly for about 4 hours. As I sat in meetings thinking, what on earth's going on? Anyway, at the end of that day, we tentatively opened up our inbox, and we'd had over 300 inquiries in the day, which was quite terrifying, but also really exciting. But anyway, it was that point that we sort of panicked, but also realised that we had the makings of something that could become quite an interesting little business. So I'm just going to... I actually have 3G. I don't know, my phone's vibrating annoyingly, so I can turn it off. Right, so yes, in our first year of operation, we largely spent developing the private hire side of the business, so mainly the weddings. And our approach to that, as has been throughout, was to say yes to everything, to experiment as much as we possibly could and to learn by doing. You know, one of the largest barriers to small business, as we have sort of found, and I have found, is a reluctance to just sort of get going. The all too swift arrival at a good reason to not do something. And there is a brilliant book out there called Do the Work by a guy called Stephen Pressfield, and he sort of delves into this enemy of the creative endeavour that he calls resistance, and sort of expands on that, and it's quite an interesting sort of expose of that. But both Joe and I have been very cognizant of resistance throughout the sort of journey of the business, and wherever possible, we always try to say yes and give things a crack. And that approach has, of course, led us to some successes, but also to an equal number of failures and mistakes. But we've learned along the way, kind of. Still learning. But anyway, by the end of the first year of trading, so sort of summer of 2016, we'd undertaken over 50 small events with our single van, and the business was kind of up and running. So we'd proven the concept by that point, and we'd realised the market. And we felt reasonably confident that we had the makings of something that was a viable business. Over the next year or so, we expanded our little fleet, adding 2 or 3 more Piaggios into the mix. And we also broadened the remit of our events to bring the Bubble Bros offering to larger events and to festivals specifically, operating the vans as paid-for public bars. And we cut our teeth in the muds of Download, which, to anyone who doesn't know, is a heavy metal festival that happens up in the north, and it's always pissing with rain. And Rosie actually came along to that one. I mean, it was baptism by fire, literally fire, and yes, to the sort of accompaniment of napalm death screaming down one side, and you know, people were still buying lots of Prosecco, rather surprisingly. But you know, it was a bit of a soft spot for Download for some reason. Lovely people. Anyway, we went from Download, and we've done lots of other festivals amongst that one, partnering with Live Nation, who's a big festival owner and event space owner. We also managed to convince EE of the phones that they needed us in the VIP hospitality area of theirs at Glastonbury, which was a great gig to net, and we've done that with them now for the last 4 years or so. We also saw enormous potential in the corporate hospitality space, summer parties, product launches, Christmas knees up, and a pinnacle of the corporate side of things was working with Business Insider, who are a big business broadcasting magazine and online presence, and we've done a few events with them, and they asked us if we could take our bubble bike, which is our motorbike and sidecar turned into a sparkling wine bar, up to the top of the Gherkin, literally the top, the 39th floor. So yes, this was a sort of classic case of us just saying yes to everything without really thinking about it. And Joe, being a sort of creative type, went to do the measuring and didn't measure very well. And so we turned up to load in the motorbike and the sidecar. It's not an insubstantial piece of equipment, to the top floor of the Gherkin, and it was just, you know, that if he'd actually measured it, there's no chance that we would have done it. But the fact that we didn't have the right measurements meant that we had to find a way. And the way that we found involved splitting the thing in half and taking the motorbike through the kitchen on the 38th floor of the Gherkin, to which the head chef there sort of erupted in a kind of Gordon Ramsay-esque tirade of expletives. What the fuck is there a motorbike doing in my kitchen? Which is probably a fair question to ask, really. Anyway, so yeah, throughout the early stages of the business, a lot of people asked us about franchising. And we did a fair amount of investigation and research into whether or not we would franchise the business. And whilst we recognised the potential, we also recognised the commitment that it would require of us. And it's interesting when things like these sorts of questions arrive on the agenda, they provide a good opportunity for one to reflect on what you want your business to be, and what it was that you sort of, you know, first excited you and interested you in the journey that you're undertaking. And Joe and I both felt that we didn't really want to run a franchise business, because that's what it would have, you know, ultimately become. It'd been a lot of work, potentially a lot of good work, but we decided that wasn't for us, and carried on elsewhere. But it did open our eyes to the opportunities of growing the business in a kind of licensing capacity, so offering up the brand and giving people the rights to trade underneath the Bubble Brothers banner elsewhere around well, around the country and around the world. So we now have a van up and running in as Bubble Brothers Incorporated in New York, which is quite exciting. And we're in the process of finalising an agreement with somebody who's going to take one of the vans to the Cayman Islands to get Bubble Brothers Caribbean up and running, which is kind of weird, but great. And we also have a van operating under the umbrella, the BB umbrella, in the most glamorous location of them all, Yorkshire. So yeah, which has been good, and we're sort of learning as we go with it, really. But it's been an interesting way of expanding the business to parts that we wouldn't be able to be there to man, so to speak. An ever-present challenge for us has been the copycats. As with any good idea, people will copy it, and it didn't take very long before we saw a lot of other Prosecco van spin-offs in our wake. The Fizzy Fellows, the Sparkle Sisters, the Bubble Boys, to name but a few, and there are a lot. Flattering, but also really frustrating in equal measure. And whilst I'd be lying if I said it hadn't initially raised the blood pressure a little bit, what it has done is keep Joe and I on the front foot. This guy's having a good time. Keep Joe and I on the front foot, to keep pushing the business into new areas, keep things fresh, and to keep us proactively investing in the Bubble Bros brand and marketing that we do around it, so that we can remain, or try to remain, market leaders, so to speak. Joe and I, as I mentioned, we both come from an advertising background, and we spent 5 years working together in an agency up in London. Joe as a creative director and myself as an account director. So out of all of the aspects of running our business, and there are many, the one that we are actually somewhat qualified to do is the branding and marketing aspect. The rest of it we are just making up as we go. But the brand and the meaning that we've managed to bake into it over the years is certainly one of the most valuable assets of the business, and that's certainly where we continue to direct energy and investment. Social media, namely good old Instagram, has been probably one of the most powerful channels for us. We have a rather Instagrammable product, I suppose, silly vehicles, bubbly booze coming out of taps, Joe and I bumbling around, being idiots. And so it's lent itself quite nicely to that as a channel and as a means for us to promote the business. We did a bit of a PR push, and we're doing one at the moment, but we did a bit of a PR push a year or so ago, and ended up on Time Out and Lad Bible, and the Lad Bible equivalent for ladies called Pretty 52, apparently. Never heard of it, but apparently it's very subscribed to. And a little video of the van sort of doing its thing got viewed over 10 million times. Which was great. It translated to a certain amount of business, but actually all it did really was sort of increase our footprint on social media and build our audiences, which is a valuable thing for us to have achieved off the back of it. And our launch into the States was certainly a big part of that. Martha Stewart, she of domestic and culinary and also tax evasion infamy, posted a picture of the van to her millions of followers, and the reaction was so demanding, were the Americans, that we literally had no other option than to ship a van over there. So it's a bit of a punt, but it seems to be doing its thing just about, as well as the steadily growing fleet of Bubble vehicles, we've got 7 of the little Piaggios now. We've got a motorbike and a sidecar, which is the Bubble bike, and we've also got a fire engine, the Spritz Blitz, which is great, which we bought in Germany. And we've been exploring other avenues alongside the events element of the business to try and bleed in some other revenue streams. And what Joe and I both quickly realised was that whilst the events aspect was a brilliant way of putting the brand out there, and of course being a fundamental lifeline for the finances of the business, it did have its limitations. Scalability, faff, overheads. Running a fleet of little vehicles is a pain in the ass because they've got to be maintained and serviced and taxed and MOT'd and insured and driven by people who don't crash them and da 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 da. So we'd always aspired for the business to be more than just a Prosecco van operator. And that's led us to other areas, such as the Bubble Brothers product range, some of which you have sampled this evening. Of course, we started with a bottled Prosecco. That felt like the logical step for us. And we now sell that through the events that we run. We also have a permanent bar in London Bridge now, and we're also selling on trade to a handful of venues, mainly around London, but would love to be doing more around here. So if anyone knows anyone who would be up for an excellent quality Prosecco on their books, then please do let me know. And we've also started working recently with a vineyard in Kent to produce an English sparkling wine, although we are looking to do something probably more around the West Sussex area as well. Just the guys in Kent are brilliant, and they've got a lovely wine, and they sit on some very mature Bacchus vines, which makes an excellent sparkling, champagne method sparkling. And they've got a brilliant South African winemaker who we've kind of become quite friendly with, who leads the charge and produces their wines. But they didn't have much of a brand, so we sort of came along and partnered with them to bring the brand and the audience and the means of getting the wine out there. They provide the wine, so it sort of works out quite nicely as a bit of a partnership. Yes, last year we secured our first longer term tenure, parking one of the vans up in a sort of semi-permanent fashion at this foodie drinky place called Vinegar Yard, which is just down the road from the Shard in South London. And that's been a brilliant experiment for us of sort of bringing the Bubble Bros offering into a more sort of bricks and mortar fashion and setting, and it's doing really well. It ticks over nicely. Much more stable way of running a business rather than events, which sort of a bit of money, nothing, panic. More events, whereas having a bar and that stable income has allowed us to explore other things with the business. That's certainly something for us to be focusing on as we look to next year. We want to probably try and get another 2 or 3 similar setups, not necessarily in London, but have vans or not. They don't even have to be vans, but bars, parked up to be able to do that. On the product front, looking to the future, a big focus for us in the coming months is aluminium, and I stupidly left my prop in the back of the van. But if you can imagine a small aluminium bottle, it's in my hand right now. So one of the big resounding themes that we've identified as we've been pootling around from event to event is the challenges of sparkling wine at events. We overcome that a lot in part by serving bubbly on tap Prosecco that you can't call Prosecco because it's not coming out of a bottle, but it is the same wine. But if you're speaking to an Italian, you might get arrested. And we've had our few close run-ins with the FSA, but we always stay on the right side of the law. There is, there's still a lot of people out there who want to buy a bottle of Prosecco when they're at an event. And we've offered carafes, but it's never quite the same. People want to take something away and pop it. And the challenge obviously is that glass is a no-no at events, health and safety, smash. And plastic is, the devil's work environmentally. And we don't want to upset David Attenborough. And this year being the year that Glastonbury sort of set the tone with the ban on the sale of single-use plastics, obviously what often happens is Glastonbury set a trend and then the rest of the festival industry sort of follows in their wake. All the Live Nation events, AEG, the big festival owners have followed that, and single-use plastics are now no, certainly for 2020, and I think by 2021 there will be a blanket ban. So there is an interesting opportunity for us, we feel, and we are experimenting with putting sparkling wine into aluminium bottles. And we're working in partnership with an aluminium company based up in Cambridge and a bottling facility up in North London. And we've done our sort of first prototype, and it was 4 out of 10. I'm going to give it. A lot of improvement to be made, but that's we've got to start somewhere. Yes, there's a lot of bubble-based experimenting to trial. And ultimately, what we are also going to need to do is raise some money. At this point, probably later in the year, we're going to open up the business to a crowd fund and try and raise £250,000 or so to try and invest properly into this side of the business so that we can really give it a proper go and spend that on marketing and also R&D for the product itself. But it's, you know, exciting, and we're optimistic and excited about what that could mean for the future of sparkling wine. And so, to wrap up my bubble-based blitherings, highs and lows. That was a specific request in the brief, which I forgot about, so I quickly tapped some out. Highs, taking the bubble bike to the top of the gherkin, definitely. Pouring a glass of Prosecco for Tilda Swinton at Glastonbury, and having her come back the next day for another one to tell us that it was the best glass of bubbly she'd ever had. She was maybe a little bit high, but she seemed to be enjoying herself. Adventuring to Germany to go and buy our fire engine, which was great, and employing an awesome group of bubble bros and bubble babes who keep the whole operation on track most of the time. Lows, plenty of lows. Yeah, it's just bloody tough running your own business, but you know, it is there. But you know, some notable lows. We had the fire engine remodeled when it was delivered to an event up in North Wales. It was on the back of a low loader lorry, and the driver drove it underneath an archway, and the archway was also Grade 1 listed. So the insurance wranglings are still ongoing with that, which is, you know, we're coming up to a year now. Logistics, and the constant mind map that whirs in my tiny head, you know, of where things need to be, when, by who, with what. You know, it's a bit of a minefield. And we had a bit of a sort of fruity early liaison with an investor, which it didn't really work out, and we had to part ways reasonably amicably, but not totally amicably. But that was a sort of, you know, not necessarily a very happy time. And then, you know, the challenges that we face looking forwards. Surrounding ourselves with the right kind of people. You know, a business like ours is heavily reliant on the right kind of people. Rosie is often leading the charge at the bubble events, which is excellent. But you know, we have had lots of people who aren't so excellent, and you know, we are reliant on those people to do a good job and represent the brand. And focus. You know, that's a big one for us. Deciding what we actually want to be doing. You know, we've got a lot of irons in the fire. A lot of things that we get a bit excited about and sort of run after and then forget about something else. But you know, what we are going through the process of doing at the moment is a bit more strategic work to try and map out what the next few years of the business looks like. And that's all from me. Thanks. Don't feel compelled to. You have to. Sorry? Yeah, I'll go and get one. I'll go and grab one. Yeah. No, they're just the little 350ml ones at the moment. But we've found a supplier who will do the 750 sort of proper bottle size. But we have to buy a lot of them in order to sort of get them into the country. But yes, I mean, aluminium is an amazing product, you know, because it's mined, yes, but it's naturally occurring, so it's mined quite easily. It's the most recyclable material out of any of the materials that we ever use day to day. If you put aluminium into the recycling bin, within 6 to 8 weeks, it's another aluminium thing, which is really interesting. You know, plastic is really not very easy to recycle. Glass is recyclable, but a lot of it happens in China. So you put your glass into the recycling, often it gets shipped to China to be recycled and then enters the glass market again, so it leaves an enormous carbon footprint. Aluminium recycling happens in the UK. And for sparkling wine, it's also fantastic because it conducts temperature so much more efficiently than glass. So if you put an aluminium bottle in the fridge, it'll chill down temperature in about 20% of the time that it takes an equivalent sized glass bottle to chill. Also means it'll warm up more swiftly, but we kind of leave that out of the spiel. Yeah, and it's very light transport. You know, I mean, we've been thinking about other interesting ways that we could get it out there, and I want to try and sell it to the airlines, you know, because there's a sort of market there. They'll be obviously very conscious of weight. Yeah, just need to make it first, you know.